AM 1160 at 747. That guy over there is Bob Pollock from the Extension Service. He joins us this morning, as always, on a Friday, and our conversation is, as always, brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. You can give Bob a call at 479-1160 or 349-WCCS. A couple of folks have tried to call Bob, and they've dropped off before I could actually get the line picked up. So if they do want to call back, they can and ask their questions. It's getting to the time of year when people start asking questions outside, isn't it?
It sure is.
Are there common questions you get at a given time of the year? I would assume this would be one of those times.
Yes. Sometimes there's a delayed reaction also. Sometimes you'll get a call in the winter about something happened to my tomato plants.
Back in August,
and then they call in the winter and want to know what that problem was.
Yeah.
And then we have to speculate a little bit.
That's after they've been researching on their own. Call Bob first. That's what we ought to call it. We ought to title this segment that. Call Bob first.
Yeah, one of the things related to that is that Penn State does have a plant disease clinic. Mm-hmm. And most states, their land-grant university has a plant disease clinic. And so in Pennsylvania, anyone can send in samples to that disease clinic, of plants they suspect have some sort of disease. So you can actually print off the form online and print that off, or we have the forms at the office that you can pick up. Just fairly simple form that you fill out, and you're just describing the symptoms and whether you've had them before or not, and how long it's been going on, and what it looks like, and what your concerns are. Mm-hmm. And then you just send that through the mail to the lab, and then they'll check that out for you. There's no charge to do that, which is amazing these days.
Sure.
But it's still no charge for that. So that's a good diagnostic tool, because there are now, if it's an insect causing the problem, they'll indicate that, hey, this is not a disease. It appears that it might be an insect problem. They can't get into doing that because then we need an entomologist to take care of that. Mm-hmm. But if it is a disease, they'll do the techniques that they need to do to identify that particular disease, whether it's a fungus or there's tests that can also be done for viruses. There are various viruses, most of which are insect vectored, meaning that an insect feeds on a weed, and then that weed is a source or a reservoir of a particular virus. So when that insect feeds on there, like an aphid, for example, they'll take in some of that virus when they feed, because they feed on the plant sap. Mm-hmm. And then when they go and find say a cucumber plant, they'll go and feed on that, and then while they're feeding on the cucumber, they'll inject some of the DNA from the virus into the cucumber, and then we can come up with a cucumber mosaic virus disease in the cucumber.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes how that all happens. So we have these weeds that they might be, usually they're perennial weeds, and they might be dandelions or dock or other weeds that, come up early in the spring. Mm-hmm. Those might be the first things that those insects feed on. And then in the case of cucumber, when it gets warmer, we plant our cucumbers out. And in the meantime, those insects have been feeding on these weeds, picking up these viruses, and then they'll transmit them to those susceptible crops when the time comes.
Works that way for humans too, doesn't it?
It does.
we pass our viruses on to one another too.
Similarities there.
Yeah, but in the plant world, I would assume that it's a fairly common thing, and that it really doesn't matter how many approaches scientifically you give to something like that. You're going to get those breakouts.
Right. Yeah. There's enough reservoir of both those pests, whether it's an insect vector disease or whether it's just an insect pest, there's usually enough of them to go around. And many plants are resistant, but they're not immune. We have a lot of, and as you look at different seeds and seed sources and different catalogs from different vendors, there are, you look at tomatoes, there's just a zillion different varieties of tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully if the vendor is legitimate and knows their product, they'll label that it's resistant to these certain diseases. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they'll just use letters, but especially some of the different viruses, and there gets to be different strains or races of these diseases, and so they might be resistant to one or two strains of it, but there might be a new strain that's out that particular tomato variety isn't resistant to. But we try to, you try to pick the best seed that you can, the most resistant seed, and if we don't, then we just need to pay more attention to the crop we're growing and look for the particular symptoms or function preventatively. Trying, especially with diseases, we try to do that preventively as much as possible, because once the disease is there, oftentimes we can't really control that well.
Well, speaking of diseases, tick-borne diseases are very, very serious. And evidently we've got a really, really huge spring coming for ticks because they're already everywhere. And so I got a question this week from somebody that said, asked Bob on Friday, is there something I can spray around my house, around the outside of my house, to prevent ticks from getting on the dog, wherever the dog goes? Because I guess the dog came back in just covered with them.
And the answer is yes, there is. There's several different products that you can use and purchase off the shelf. And they will, the key is to look for a product, usually some of the synthetic pyrethroids, even pyrethrin, that's the natural occurring product, but then the other ones have all been synthesized, or, they figured out that chemical structure and they just are able to reproduce that. But oftentimes those are the products that are most available off the shelf that, yes, you then are labeled to treat for ticks in yards, that you can at least minimize the chance. You probably still will have to preventatively treat your dog. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're trying to maybe do this from a couple different angles. One is to, trying to keep the dog healthy and treat with labeled products for the animal, but then also you can treat the surroundings. Mm-hmm. And keeping things, everybody's property is different. Some people live right up against the woods, so your risks might be higher there versus, somebody in a neighborhood where everything is mowed and kept, and you maybe don't have as many wild animals roaming around to help move, Yeah. But even in neighborhoods, we have deer walking down the streets in Indiana, mm-hmm. Not always on the sidewalk either. They'll, come through town, so they can easily bring ticks in and move them around, as well as other, skunks and raccoons and other wildlife that come in. So we shouldn't assume that we're safe because we live in town or versus somebody that lives, in a more rural area.
They're everywhere.
Right. And then the other piece of that is protecting ourselves. There's pretty well lined out things that if you go hiking in the woods, or, to wear the appropriate clothing and socks and shoes and all that. And sometimes we ignore those preventative things, but in a year where we may have very, higher levels, higher risk levels, then if that's one of the things we do, go biking or hiking and walking in those areas, then we need to take those precautions. And then, of course, checking, when you get back from that walk, to check, It's easy to forget those steps or too busy to do them. And
the consequences are very grave.
Yes.
All right. There you go. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
It is the voice of Indiana County. It is WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160. We're just about 2 minutes away from the top of the hour. Fox News comes your way then. Josh Whittison in our WCCS newsroom. Pirates broadcaster Joe Block will be joining us right after the 8 o'clock news from Bradenton, Florida. They're getting set to pack the bags and head north.
What in tarnation do you have going on in there?
I don't have much time to talk. The cows still need a milking, and I don't want them to crush my eggs.
Why do you need all these animals in your house?
Did you see the cost of groceries? I decided to rent me some animals to help cut costs. I reckon, why buy the cow when you can rent the chicken?
You don't need rental animals. What you need is Brad at InFirst Financial.
Hi, this is Brad Peterson, Managing Director of InFirst Financial Advisors and Infinex Investment Executive. When planning your future with InFirst, we can help by providing sound advice that will be